Welcome to Season 4 of Might in Motion, the podcast that champions motivation, momentum, mindfulness, and might. I'm Mariana Kinney, your host, bringing you conversations with inspiring leaders and innovators who challenge the status quo and push boundaries in their careers and lives. Whether you're here to grow, lead, or ignite your own journey, we're here to keep you moving forward. Let's dive in. Today, I get to welcome Jenna Zalewski. She has been in supply chain working across various modes and leadership positions at Schneider for the past 13 years. Her experience working with large Fortune 500 companies to develop innovative, sustainable solutions to the ever-changing environment of supply chain is unmatched. Jenna, welcome to Might in Motion.
Thank you so much for having me, Mariana. I'm so excited for our conversation today.
I am too, because we go way back. So we work together. We've been on opposite sides of the table when it comes to supply chain. And I always wanted to ask you this, and I never did. And I purposely did not ask you before this call. But I want to know what your origin story is and how you got sucked into this lovely, crazy world of trucking.
So I wish I had, a really exciting story to share about it. I actually went to college for business and accounting, recognized that accounting was absolutely not for me. And I took an internship with Schneider my junior year of college. And what one of my professors actually said is, just be aware, once you get in transportation, you're never going to leave. And so it's so true. 13 years later, I still connect to that professor, and he still holds that over my head that once you are in transportation, you are just sucked right in. So I've been here ever since.
Yeah, that resonates with me because my origin story actually started with an internship at Saya Motor Freight, which was a very entertaining job to tell my dad about. But I basically rode around with truck drivers in Oklahoma for a summer doing time studies. And here we are,
What better way to learn?
Yeah. I mean, it's just, it reshaped my perspective of what I thought a truck driver was, or what I thought the industry was. How did your internship kind of shift maybe the mindset you had from watching movies or, television on what you thought the industry was all about?
I think the biggest area that I learned so much about, even in the first year to 2 years, was how critical transportation is. So now, fast forward, we've all gone through the global pandemic and we've recognized how important supply chain is. But for those of us that have been in transportation for far longer than the pandemic, the supply chain is a necessary evil at times, but it moves everything that all of us consumers need to have. So I think that was where it really drew me in, as to you don't just see the trucks on the road, but those trucks serve a very specific purpose that we all need. And without those trucks and without those drivers and everybody behind the scenes, you're just not going to get the products on the shelf, or you're going to get them, but it might just be at a different cost point because you don't have as much of the supply as you do the demand.
Yeah. I've had the privilege of not only working on the domestic side, but the international side, and then moving freight, offshore to places like Hawaii and Guam and whatnot. And it's, people don't even realize, how does it get on the shelf? How does that product, get there, so that if you're going to go get your eggs or your lumber or whatever, there's not necessarily that concept. But the pandemic, I think, opened a lot of people's eyes to how connected we all are, and how, supply chain really is like the heartbeat of everything we do.
And I still think, even to this day, there's a lot of confusion in the supply chain. I was talking to a few customers probably about 3 months ago with the port strike concerns. And they were so concerned about buying toilet paper and paper towel and a lot of things that are made domestically.
Yeah.
Really are not impacted by the port strike. But you never really know that unless you're kind of stuck in the middle of the supply chain. Where are products produced? Where are the raw materials coming from? And then how does the supply chain move not only across the US, but across the entire globe?
Yeah. There's that potential and that impact to how freight flows, but within supply chain, the one thing I think that was always constant for me was change, and continues to be, and you have to have some level of flexibility, ability to work in a space where everything isn't necessarily defined, by metrics and all the things we would love to have. How do you stay open to change, and how do you help your team stay open to change?
It's probably one of my favorite reasons why I'm still in transportation. I actually had my prior leader, his favorite statement was the only constant is change. And he just continued to reinforce that with us on a regular basis. It is the only constant. So,
Yep.
when I think about change, it does challenge me in different ways because maybe what happened last year is not the same that happened this year. So, how do I think about leading differently in a different market, in a different environment? What does the technology look like? So it's kind of
Mhm.
one of those things where you can never really take your foot off the gas, because if you take it off for even a short period of time, you are going to find yourself behind your competitors, because that change is so constant and so rapid in this kind of environment.
Sometimes people think that the person that's actually behind the wheel isn't open to new technologies. And as somebody who's had to stand at a welcome center and talk to truck drivers quite frequently, I think folks would actually be surprised at how most are actually pretty savvy on the tech side, especially those overnight over the road drivers. I mean, the sleeper cabs are decked out with more technology than I have in my den, right? So, do you think that the industry or the people who are actually the lifeblood, the ones that are actually driving the trucks, how open are they to change?
Yeah, I think it depends on the person and the change,
Mhm.
right? No change is ever going to be consistent across the board and always welcomed, but we do see things. I even remember when we went from manual trucks to automatic trucks, and that was a big change. And everybody
Mhm.
had said, this is not going to happen. And it did. And now I
Mhm.
just couldn't imagine these drivers going back to manual trucks. I think a lot of them would be completely on the other side of the fence that they were before. But I also think what happened is now we have welcomed kind of a new group of
Mm.
truck drivers, and that's with the female drivers. So now you don't have as many manual trucks, you have automatic trucks. It makes it a little bit easier for this kind of untapped potential, I would say. So we have almost 13% of our fleet is female drivers, and that should
Wow.
continue to grow. It's a good sign, and we want to make that better, easier, a different kind of lifestyle for them. But to your point, the trucks, I mean, they have microwaves, they have TVs. It really is an apartment on wheels. So, how do you make it easier so that they can focus on moving the miles and moving the freight safely instead of steering away from technology that might slow them down?
Yeah.
Or there's so many different things that they can do even on their phones or tablets. You're very familiar with that with the
Yeah.
organization that you work with. It's all about efficiency, and they absolutely want to earn a higher paycheck too.
Yeah, because it's the miles is what helps them. Sitting does not. So it's all about trying to keep them moving. And I'd like to try to remind our listeners and those that maybe aren't in this industry, give people a lot of wide breath when they're on the roads, right? Like there's a reason that that guy or gal is trying to get somewhere, so that hopefully they can get home safely and in one piece. And they're not like cars. So I always like to kind of put that out there because sometimes I think people forget. You and I, like you said, we had the opportunity to work together for a period of time, and even in the green room before we started recording, we were talking about relationships, and supply chain, in my mind, really is a relationship business. It's all about how you treat people, what kind of energy you're giving, how do you help people elevate, how do you help people win so that everybody wins. What do you try to do with your team or as you support customers to help foster that growth of relationships?
It's a great question. It absolutely is a people industry. And I know a lot of folks say that. I've worked with people today that I worked with 13 years ago. I've worked with 5 years ago, and our paths have crossed in a different way now. And so definitely don't burn those bridges. That's very important. You never know who you're going to work with or for.
Yep.
I think that's an important element. But I think from when I think about how people think, it's very different. So it can be very emotional or it can be very data driven. And I think it's important to sometimes take a step back, ask questions, ask follow up questions, ask leading questions. But it really helps to understand, what are they trying to get at? So on my team, I actually have an all female operations team, which I'm super proud of. They're amazing. And so there are times where we might have seen things differently because of our paths have come from different elements.
Mm-hmm.
But in transportation, change is constant, as we've already talked about. So there might be multiple right answers. So the right answer this week might be different than the right answer in 3 months. So I think it's really important to understand, what is the true objective, and then how do we skate in that direction together, versus you're stepping over each other because you're not truly listening or you're not asking the right questions. So I think taking the time, asking the questions, and ensuring that your communication is on point, because it could change in a month. As we sit here in December, by the time January, February hits, it could be a completely different area.
Yep.
Holidays are past, and now we're looking at things from a different scope. So always just try to keep an open mind.
Yeah, I like how you mentioned listening and trying to help others, not like yourself, understand like what the root why is, that whole asking questions. It's the why, like we do when we're 5. And being able to try to harness that in a way so that, to your point, you understand what your customer needs, you understand what your employees need. I think anybody, even if you're not in supply chain, if you're leading a team or an environment where you've got customers, that whole curiosity and trying to see different ways to get to the answer is so critical. That's what drives, I think, everybody winning.
And I know you and I have had multiple discussions as we work together in our past too, about what works for one part of the country might not work for another part of
Yeah.
the country. And so it's not really this peanut butter spread. It's, what does the business need? What did at the time, what did the stores need? What do the drivers need?
Mm-hmm.
And then how do we work that collaboratively? So it's not, well, this is what you need, this is what I need, and we're at a standstill. It was
Right.
really, there's some cases where we're going to win in portions and we're not in others. But as long as we knew this together and we kind of understood some of the dynamics that we were going to still face, no matter which decision we went with, I think that was really important. And it was very open and transparent. So
Yeah.
there was no secrets, there was no blindsidedness. And I think that's important too. Everybody has to be on the same page.
How do you think about, key performance indicators, KPIs, on helping people align on what that end division is?
I think part of it is this long term? So
Mm.
it's easy for people to be successful for a few months. It's easy for people to be successful for a few days. They're just starting out. They might have some solid wins under their belt, but does it stay long term? Is this
Mhm.
something that 10 years down the road, you can still look back and say, that's still working? Even in a changing environment, there are some dynamics that just need to stay in place, or you've created them so much that the business, we were talking before about what happens if a hurricane hits or what happens if a blizzard hits. That chaos, you don't use it every day, but if you are the person that they call, that to me is a solid indicator that that relationship is there and that trust is there, which is so important, because especially when you're thinking about helping people in need, you have to have somebody that you can rely on that's going to pick up that call.
Yeah. Now, You know, you made a shift in your career probably multiple times, but most recently you're going from sales to more operations. How have you personally navigate change? Change with your own, career. You picked up, you moved states, and there's so many people that, oh my gosh, like I wish I had the courage that Jenna had to pack everything up and go do something completely different. How did you approach those big decisions of change in your life that other people maybe can take a lesson from?
Well, for starters, I think life is too short. So I think a big reason is if I didn't change, then I really got comfortable. And that's where I felt I was. I was comfortable. I knew what I was doing. And then this opportunity came up where operations is not something that I had been a part of before. I've been in sales for almost my entire 13-year career. So it was very, very new to me, but it was so critically important to the sales work that I've built and the knowledge and the experience that operations really was a stepping stone to say, now I continue to build my arsenal personally and from a leadership professionally, because now I'm leading a large fleet of drivers, and they each have nuances that I have to work through and continue to build the people aspect. On the move, I would encourage anybody to do it. It is scary. It can be very scary. But I've met some amazing people down in Texas that I wouldn't have had the opportunity to if we wouldn't have made this move. So
Yeah.
it can be scary at first, but staying in the same comfortable place can also be very scary. So I would absolutely challenge people to get out of their comfort zone and think about it really from a long-term perspective instead of because what's going to happen is you're not going to do it now. 5 years are going to go by and you're going to wish you might have considered it 5 years ago.
Hey, listeners, I hope you're enjoying this conversation as much as I am. If you're finding value in these insights, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you're listening. Your support helps us reach more people and bring even more inspiring guests to the show. Let's keep building this incredible community together.
Yeah, I was talking to somebody recently and they were saying, I can't believe you left a company after 22 years, and it's like, yeah, there was some fear in it because you know everybody or everybody knows you, and now you're in a different space. But that the whole commentary on that, if you're getting too comfortable, you're not growing. And you've got to have, like when you work out, right? It's when your muscles hurt, that they're growing, they're improving. It's the same thing if you're trying to be, or if you're artistic and you're creating something and there's a frustration and you got to redo it. It's the same thing in your career. You've got to continue to stretch and grow, and sometimes that requires physical change as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's where I've struggled the most in my career is when I'm too comfortable. So,
Yes.
and I know that personally. And so I kind of hit this point where all of a sudden I feel my comfort level. And for me personally, sometimes it can be frustration and I feel it, I know it, and I have to make a change. But it needs to be one that continues to challenge me and allows me to grow again as a leader and even just as an individual.
A lot of people who listen to the podcast are in the corporate space, and many times they're new to leadership. So they were a phenomenal individual contributor. They get promoted. They're excited because they now have direct reports. What was some lessons that you learned early on in your career on how to navigate now having a team? And you mentioned now you have this large fleet of drivers. There's challenges based on sizes of teams that you have. What are some of the things that you've done to help grow community within your teams?
Whew, I could answer this question multiple different ways. I've learned a lot. And leadership is you're not going to learn it from a book. You're not going to learn it from really anything but experience. I would say one of the first leadership changes that I made, I didn't do some of the things that I mentioned before, listen, ask questions. I came in with, I'm the leader. This is what I think is right. And here's where we're going to go. And it absolutely fell flat. So anybody that's becoming a new leader, don't come in thinking that you're going to make all these changes and everybody's just going to get on board, because again, we are people, we are human beings, we have emotions. So when you're making these changes, really seek to understand, take the time to learn the team, develop trust, develop respect within that team, and then allow them to help you understand what changes need to be made. There's going to be some changes that you might have to make and the team doesn't get a say in, and that's okay too. But any large changes that truly impact the team, it's really important to have their buy off. Otherwise, it's not going to go very well. And that change likely is not going to lead to what you anticipate it to look like.
Yeah. Yeah. There's been, in my career, I've shifted a few times, and there were multiple times where I was the new kid on the block. So I came maybe from a completely different part of the organization, or maybe just moving from one company to another, where some people knew me, but the core people who reported to me did not. You mentioned building trust. Are there things that you do to spark that building trust process? Because it does take time. It's not something like right out the gate. Oh, I trust Jenna because she said she would do it in the first meeting, so now I trust her. That how do you go about building that trust over time with new teams?
I would say one example is my recent move. So I have spent 13 years in our corporate office, and anybody that works in the field versus a corporate office kind of has this stigma about it, right? Oh, they're from corporate.
Yeah.
And so I've learned that. I never really recognized it because I was the one from corporate that I'm sure people were whispering behind my backs as I went to the field offices. But now you go lead a field office. And I think that was one of the areas that I caught pretty early on, was there was this level of, she's from corporate. Well, that wasn't my intention. And so I kind of had to break that barrier down first of understanding I'm from corporate. I want to help you. So help me leverage those corporate relationships. I know a lot of folks in the corporate office. So, what are some of the challenges that you see? How could we maybe connect our team and our leaders to particular people that can help break down those barriers? So I'm not taking it all on, because I want my team, I want to empower them to learn what this means, who these people are, whether it's IT or some sort of planning type of system work. And I think that's really important because it helps them grow and it helps them develop as well. But they know that I'm there for them and I will help make those connections. So corporate doesn't have to be this big, scary thing. But it really can be breaking down some of those barriers that you maybe didn't have access to before because you weren't sure that it even existed or who to go to.
Yeah, I love that. I love that thought process of being there for the team and helping them learn and drive change, because you can leverage relationships that you had. That's so critical to create a community. I like to talk about taking a team from chaos to community, and community is all about the relationships, which we talked about at the beginning, right? It all comes full circle. As you think back on your career of, over a decade, as you look forward over the next, like in 5 years, 10 years from now, where do you see, like, what do you want to grow and change between now and then? Like, what do you want to be able to tell your future self and, in the next 10 years?
Such a good question. It's like one of those questions of what do you want to be when you grow up? The answer is always, I don't really know. I still feel like I'm trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up. One of the things that I really wanted was the large group leadership. That was important to me. So how do you lead across hundreds of associates and be able to, it's not the one-on-one, you really have to seek to understand within groups. And so that was important to me. As you know, I love the customer aspect of things. And so helping customers understand the nuances in their supply chain end to end was critically important. And now I see from an operations standpoint what those drivers need to be able to do. And then there's just some nuances where that's not going to connect all the time. And, I think it's really helpful to be even better for the end-to-end supply chain when I have customer experience and I have now operational experience. So I want to continue to build upon what that large group leadership looks like. And then how can I help tie that into this kind of stool? We call it the three-legged stool, where you have, the business, the customer, and the drivers. And how do we help ensure that that stool is continuing to progress forward?
I love that. I love taking notes whenever I'm interviewing somebody, and I, of course, have copious amounts of notes. But if somebody's like, man, I'm resonating with what Jen is saying. Maybe I'm like early in my career in supply chain, and the way that you navigated your career is interesting. Is the best way for people to connect with you through LinkedIn?
It would be. Yes, absolutely. And I would welcome anybody to send messages if they have questions. I love to learn from other people too. So maybe they've been in an experience that we can kind of go back and forth on how we think about it. I love the challenge. I think it makes me a better person. And hopefully I can help others as well.
I will drop Jenna's LinkedIn profile in the show notes for those of you that are listening, maybe not be watching. And as you know, I'd love to recap. And so some of the things that I wrote down, your background, your education was in business and accounting, and you took this risk of an internship. And once you were in, like you just fell in love with supply chain. And I love that. It's very similar, to my background. And I think that, those of you that are, maybe in college and you're exploring different career opportunities, don't shy away from the supply chain ones. They're exciting. There's constant change. We talked about how, what happened last year may not work this year, and you get to be creative. You get to look at what happened. You get to continue to innovate. And so many industries that might not be the case, but in supply chain, every single day can be completely different. That's where relationships come in. We talked about this as a people industry. Your paths are going to cross, so don't burn bridges. And you do that by asking questions and understanding what's the reason for maybe a change or a request from a customer, so that you can best get your team on board and align to whatever that request may be. I love how you talked about how there might be multiple right answers. We all go to school and we think there's only one way to solve the mathematical equation. But in supply chain, there's so many different ways to get to that final solution. And customer versus service provider, when both sides can come to the table and say, what might win for me? I want it to be a win for you too. That's when real, I think, magic and innovation can happen. We talked also as well about, hey, you took a risk. You left your, where you were for a long time. You physically moved to different states. You went from sales to operations, and life is just too short. So go get uncomfortable. Go learn and put yourself in a place where you can grow. Because if you're too static, then that means you're not continuing to develop, and you're not able, to develop your leadership skills and your growth skills of now having, hundreds of people. You've got to manage differently. You've got to drive change differently. And that really allows you to lean into those relationships so that you can build trust, so you can break down walls, and you can actually leverage those past experiences to help with the new ones. There's that, even though change is happening and you're taking what might be considered a big risk, you can bring those experiences that you had with you. And I think that's really, really cool. And I hope our listeners can really glean something from that as they make decisions about their career. This was really cool, Jenna. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I've really enjoyed getting to know your background more than I did before. And I hope that this inspires more people, especially women, to get into supply chain, because it is a really cool place to be.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the time.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Might in Motion. Remember, every step forward counts, and the power to create momentum starts with you. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe, share, and leave us a review. It makes a huge difference. Until next time, stay inspired, stay mindful, and keep moving with might.